Today we're talking my end of year Bitcoin price prediction. Everybody's giving these, right? Everybody's saying we're going to 1,000,000, we're going to 250K, we're going lower. So I wanted to hop on here and give my 2 cents. We're going to go through some other Bitcoin predictions that other people have given. We're going to go through some bullish tailwinds that could be sending us higher. And we're also going to cover some potential negative catalysts that could keep us in the same range or keep us from really breaking out. Before we do get into it, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube. Really appreciate your support. I'm also going to put a QR code down below for a Bitcoin tip. So if you want to support the channel, feel free to leave me a little tip. Now let's get into it. When I started doing research for this video, I just straight up asked Grok, the AI chatbot that I typically use, what Grok thinks the Bitcoin price is going to be by the end of this year, just to kind of kick things off and get things started. And Grok gave me an estimate that the Bitcoin price is going to be between $150,000 and $170,000 by the end of this year. And I honestly think that's a pretty good guess. When we look at all the bullish stuff that we've seen for Bitcoin, like this new administration coming in, the Bitcoin ETFs continuing to eat up Bitcoin, these Bitcoin treasury companies, I think that a lot of Bitcoiners were expecting that Bitcoin would be a bit higher by now, but we're still just above 100K. I believe we're around 117K right now. And with the fact that we just haven't seen Bitcoin take off here, I think it's hard to make a Bitcoin price prediction that we're going to see, Bitcoin hit like $300,000 or $500,000 for the end of this year. Now, we have seen a lot of demand. We're seeing a macro environment that is going to support Bitcoin throughout the rest of this year. We just got a rate cut yesterday, so you never know. The thing about Bitcoin is it is volatile. And if we do see a huge surge in demand, we could see Bitcoin go a lot higher than people expect, but I think that that is a pretty fair and conservative estimate from Grok. Now let's get into some price predictions that I have seen from individuals in the Bitcoin space. We could start off with Tom Lee from Fundstrat, who is someone I often see speaking on the news and kind of giving his outlook for Bitcoin. And one of the main reasons why I wanted to include him in this video is that he's been right a lot of the time when he makes these Bitcoin price predictions. And his prediction for the end of the year, the latest one that I saw from him, is $200,000. And the reason for this prediction from him is that he sees this continuous inflow from these Bitcoin ETFs, even though we have days where we have heavy outflows. And actually, let's go ahead and take a look at a little chart here, which shows the spot Bitcoin ETF inflows and outflows. And as you can see, this chart is mostly green. We've mostly seen heavy inflows, and the more these ETFs eat up, right, that's less supply that's out there. And when we see less supply out there that's available for sale, we're going to see the Bitcoin price go higher to force people to sell. So if we continue to see people buying into these Bitcoin ETFs, we can expect the Bitcoin price to go higher. He's also basing this prediction on the halving cycles. We know that after the halving, typically 12 to 18 months after it, that's when we see Bitcoin's price really appreciate. And we are in that 12 to 18 month range after the halving. So I think people are a little surprised that we aren't higher, right? We have seen some good appreciation, but we haven't seen the type of appreciation following the halving that we've seen in previous cycles. And I do think that a big part of that is that we are just a larger asset now. Bitcoin is above a $2 trillion market cap, and it takes a lot more demand to move the Bitcoin price here than it did when Bitcoin was a much smaller asset. So I do think that, for one, I do think that the halving is just going to become less significant as we see the Bitcoin block reward continue to get cut in half. I just don't think it's going to impact the price as much, and we aren't going to see this cyclical behavior like we've seen with previous cycles. But We know that typically, as we see less supply entering the circulating supply with the halving, that's going to lead to a higher price. So he's basing this prediction on that. And then he's also basing it on macro trends. And what he means by that is monetary expansion. We saw just yesterday that we got our first rate cut of the year for 25 basis points, which is great. I believe it's the first one. We may have gotten one at the beginning of this year. I don't think we did though. We're going to see more rate cuts throughout the rest of this year. I checked on Polymarket this morning and it looks like there is an 82% probability that we're going to see another 25 basis point cut in October. And then I checked another prompt, which is how many rate cuts we're going to see throughout the rest of this year. And I think this is including the rate cut we saw yesterday. And according to Polymarket, there is a 66% probability that we see 3 rate cuts for 75 basis points. And that's including the one we just got, but that is still going to be very bullish for Bitcoin. So I understand why Tom Lee thinks that we could really see Bitcoin take off here and get all the way to $200,000 if we get a good macro environment and we continue to see this Bitcoin demand, then things could move pretty fast. Yeah, Bitcoin's been acting kind of lame and boring lately, but we know that Bitcoin can get volatile quickly and we can see big moves. Another person that thinks that we could see big moves in Bitcoin is Samson Mao. Now, Samson Mao is one of my favorite people in the Bitcoin space, and I really like the way he thinks about Bitcoin. I think that he just thinks about Bitcoin like supply and demand. He thinks that we are seeing so much demand. He thinks that this nation state demand that we could potentially be seeing pretty soon here could move the Bitcoin price very quickly. And that makes sense, right? If the US were to come in, or China, or one of these large superpowers were to come in and buy up a ton of Bitcoin, right, they can move the price very quickly. And I think that nation states are going to be incentivized to do this, especially as Bitcoin continues to go higher. So he thinks that, he's always talked about this Omega candle idea and these God candles, right, where we're going to see like $100,000 move in a day. And if we really start to see Bitcoin demand take off and there just isn't that much supply out there, I think it could happen. Now, he said we were going to hit $1 million per Bitcoin last year, and he made the same prediction this year. I don't really think that's going to happen. We're still around $100,000. Could we see some big moves over the next 2 years? I definitely think it's possible, but I think that maybe Samson Mao, is maybe a little bit too excited and thinking that we're going to hit $1 million this year. I'm not sure if he still thinks that. I think he made that prediction closer to the beginning of this year. But I understand the thinking, right? Really, the Bitcoin supply could run out if enough people want it, if enough nation states want it. And with that, we could see the Bitcoin price go a lot higher. I would not estimate that we're going to get to $1 million this year though. Another prediction I saw is from Tim Draper, another one of my favorite people in the Bitcoin space. And the main reason that I really like Tim Draper is that he just keeps things simple. Anytime I hear him on an interview talking about Bitcoin, he basically just says that Bitcoin is better money, right? It's a better technology. And for that reason, people are going to be incentivized to adopt it. And those that don't adopt it are going to be in a pretty bad situation. He talks about the adoption we've seen with the traditional finance world, with these ETFs, with the banks now potentially coming in, with the repeal of SAB 121. And they're definitely going to come in and start offering Bitcoin services, doing Bitcoin custody for their customers. And if you actually want to learn more about what SAB 121 is and why the repeal of it is significant, check out my YouTube channel. I got a video about it on there. But I just think that, he thinks similarly to Samson Mao, that it's just supply and demand, and we are going to see more and more demand. We're going to see more people adopting the better technology, and that's going to push the Bitcoin price up. Now, he made this prediction a couple of years ago that it was going to hit $250,000. So he's been wrong on this, but he's continuing to stick with it. And he steered me wrong a little bit. I believed him a couple of years ago. I was like, we're going to see this great rally, right? It's just better money. Everyone's going to adopt it. Things are going to move fast. But I think that maybe with some of these people like Samson Mao and Tim Draper, I love the way they look at Bitcoin because I think they just simplify things and it just makes sense. But maybe this process does take longer than some of us think. Now let's get into some bullish things we're seeing and some bullish catalysts that can move us higher heading into the end of this year. I want to start off by looking at one of my favorite charts, which is the Bitcoin balance on exchanges chart. So let's go ahead and take a look at this visual here. And as you can see, around the time of the election, we really started to see, or the election result where we found out that Trump won, we've seen the supply of Bitcoin on exchanges moving down. I've talked about this chart a lot, but it's something that I really keep my eye on. If we're seeing the balance on exchanges continue to head lower and there's less Bitcoin for sale, that is going to result in a higher price. So as long as we see this continue to trend downward, this green shaded area, I'm going to continue to be bullish. We could see the golden line there is the Bitcoin price, and we see that these two lines diverge, right? As the supply goes down, the Bitcoin price goes up. Another bullish catalyst that we've really seen this year are these Bitcoin treasury companies. We now have over 152 publicly traded companies that are holding Bitcoin as of this month, and they hold around 1 million Bitcoin. Now, you have a company like Strategy who has over 600,000 Bitcoin, but you have new players coming in. You have 21 Capital coming in and trying to do the same thing. You have a lot of other companies that are starting to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. What if we get some more of these Mag 7 companies to hold Bitcoin? That's going to mean good things for the price. So I think that this adoption we're seeing at the business level is very bullish for Bitcoin. Another potential bullish catalyst is nation state demand. And this is something I always think about. What if an entity like the United States wants to come in and buy up a ton of Bitcoin? They have a lot of money. They can do it if they want to. They could do it really fast. Or maybe one of these other large superpowers like China or Russia, what if they, we know that they want to get around the dollar system and move to other ways to trade with each other, trading without dollars. What if we see some of these other large countries really start to adopt Bitcoin to get out of the dollar system? They could really push up the Bitcoin price very fast, and there's really not a ton of Bitcoin out there. There's only like 2 million Bitcoin out there for sale on exchanges. So we could see things move very fast if nation states start to get involved, and then we see other nation states try to one-up other nation states, right? If China were to buy a bunch of Bitcoin, you can bet that the US would consider buying a bunch of Bitcoin. So I think if we really were to see this nation state game theory heat up, this could be something that could push the Bitcoin price a lot higher, right? This could be something that could get us to that 1 million Bitcoin number that Samson Mao is predicting. And Samson Mao has actually talked a lot about nation state adoption and how it is going to significantly impact the Bitcoin price. So we will see when that happens. I think that nation states are going to get more involved, but we will see if that happens this year. Now, looking at the macro environment, we already talked about the potential rate cuts that we're going to see throughout the rest of this year. We know that that's going to be bullish for Bitcoin and other assets as well. But what if we see some heavy QE from the Federal Reserve, right? When there is not enough demand for US Treasuries and we see yields spiking, what happens? The Federal Reserve has to basically create new monetary units and buy the US Treasuries themselves. And with these rate cuts, let's say we do see more rate cuts, three rate cuts throughout the rest of this year, then that could really spike inflation, right? What if we see inflation take off? We see asset prices take off. And what if people leave the US Treasuries market and go into US equities, Bitcoin, gold, and there just isn't a ton of Treasury demand, and we see yields spiking? That is going to be a bad scenario for the United States. And I actually think that's why it's going to be really hard for the United States or the Fed to cut the federal funds rate too much, because I do think we will see inflation spike back up and they need to keep people in the treasuries market. But if this happens, they're going to have to do some QE. And when they create more monetary units and buy the debt themselves, that is going to increase the money supply, and it's going to lead to Bitcoin heading a lot higher. So we potentially have these rate cuts and QE that could be poising Bitcoin for a big move higher. Before we get to my Bitcoin price prediction, I want to cover some potential negative catalysts that could keep the Bitcoin price lower. A main one is if we see the Fed keep monetary policy tight. Now, we just got the first Fed rate cut this year, and everyone's expecting more rate cuts, but what if these rate cuts don't happen? I think that everyone was expecting that we were going to get more rate cuts by now this year, and the Fed is very unpredictable, right? They have been known to change their mind on things. If they do see some negative reactions to this latest rate cut, maybe they decide to keep monetary policy tight, right? Maybe if inflation were to kick back up, they could consider raising rates. And in that scenario, that's not going to be great for Bitcoin, right? I don't think that they're going to be able to do this because I think that they have kept monetary policy tight for so long. I think that if they don't loosen monetary policy, they're going to run into some other problems like the economy breaking or us heading into a recession. And that's going to lead to a bigger mess that's going to require more money printing. And if they did keep things too tight, or we were to have some other sort of black swan event that sent us into a recession where stocks are crashing or the economy is crashing, we could see Bitcoin head lower before it heads higher, right? Bitcoin is very liquid. If people need to sell assets to pay off debts or, to get by, Bitcoin's something that is very easy to sell. So we could see them sell Bitcoin, and we know that Bitcoin has headed down with the stock market in the past. I don't think it should really act like that. I do think that Bitcoin is not like an equity. I think it is a safe haven asset, but in a crash, you never know. It could be, or in a recession, it could be a crash then rip scenario, right? We could head lower before we head higher. The last negative catalyst that I want to cover is if we are to see some sort of regulatory crackdown from a larger nation state. We saw the mining ban in China a couple of years ago, which heavily impacted the Bitcoin price. Last year, we saw Germany dump around 50,000 Bitcoin. That had an impact. That was pretty stupid. That was when Bitcoin was around $60,000, and now look where we are. I'm sure Germany's regretting that. So I don't think that countries are going to be this stupid enough to sell a ton of Bitcoin, but it looks like the US has sold some Bitcoin under the prior administration. Germany sold some, and we've seen others sell Bitcoin as well. So I don't think this is smart, but we do know that if countries do hold a good portion of Bitcoin and they dump it, that could have a negative impact on the Bitcoin price. And if we see some legislation that's going to hurt Bitcoin adoption in some of these larger countries, that could hurt Bitcoin as well. Now, in the United States, it looks like things are trending the right way for Bitcoin, and we're really becoming open to Bitcoin and adopting Bitcoin. So I don't think this would happen here, but it's just something we need to keep our eye on, right? We could, if we were to see a large country like China dump a bunch of Bitcoin, that could have a big impact on the Bitcoin price. Let's get to the important part of the video, my Bitcoin price prediction for the end of this year. So looking at everything we've talked about in this video, other people's price predictions, the macro environment, right, with these rate cuts, with potential QE, with this continuous demand that we're seeing for Bitcoin, whether it is Bitcoin treasury companies, through these Bitcoin ETFs, right? We're going to see the banks start to offer Bitcoin services. That's going to be bullish. And then potentially nation states starting to stack more. I just see continuous Bitcoin demand and a good environment, right? With liquidity rising, with the dollar supply rising. And I think that we really haven't seen a ton of that this year. right? We have seen the M2 money supply start to rise, but with rate cuts, with QE, I think it could rise a lot higher. So I think that in the next 6 months, we are going to see some good price movement for Bitcoin. But the question is, where will it be by the end of this year? And to be honest with you, I have no idea, right? We can make predictions in the short term, but Bitcoin is very unpredictable. It could go up a lot, it could go up a little, it could go up a lot, then crash back down and correct. But just based on what I'm seeing out there, I think that a good range for the Bitcoin price by the end of this year is between $175,000 and $200,000. Now, if we do get some of these mega bullish catalysts like the US buying more, I think we could definitely go higher. And I think that in 2026, we probably will reach another level where we do get some of these big moves, where we do potentially get an omega candle like Samson Mao talks about, or a $50,000 daily move at some point. The long-term outlook for Bitcoin beyond 2025 is looking very good to me. I think we are going to continue to see adoption when it comes to Bitcoin, and we're going to continue to see a macro environment that is going to push Bitcoin higher in dollar terms, right? We are going to see the fiat money supply continue to rise, and I think more people are going to be incentivized to get out of fiat and into Bitcoin. With Bitcoin sitting around $115,000 right now, we really haven't seen a ton of appreciation this year, and I think that it's a great time to get in. Really, if you understand what is happening here with the fact that we are moving to a new monetary system, there is never a bad time to sell out of dollars, out of fiat, and into Bitcoin. So it's a great time to do that. That's going to wrap it up for this one. If you didn't like and subscribe, please make sure to do that now. Thanks for watching. I'll be back soon.